My name is Eliana Brooks. The day I turned 18, my father smiled, wrapped an arm around my shoulders, and told everyone at my birthday party how proud he was of me. 3 hours later, he threatened to throw me out of the house. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was discovering that he had been planning to steal my grandmother's legacy for years, and he had no idea she had already outsmarted him. Before I tell you how everything exploded, you need to understand why a rundown mountain lodge nearly destroyed my family. The story starts 6 years earlier. I was 12 when my grandmother, Eleanor Brooks, began taking me to Pine Ridge Lodge every summer. The lodge sat high above Silver Creek Valley, hidden behind rows of towering pine trees that blocked most of the afternoon sunlight. The gravel road leading there was rough enough to rattle your teeth, and the wooden porch leaned slightly downhill. Most people saw an old building. I saw magic. The place smelled like cedar wood, coffee, old books, and the fireplace that had been burning every winter since before my father was born. Grandma loved that lodge. Every board, every nail, every crack in the walls held a memory. "Come on," she would say every Saturday morning. "A building doesn't take care of itself." So we worked. We repaired fences. We cleaned gutters. We painted window frames. She taught me how to identify water damage before it spread, how to check a foundation, how to winterize plumbing. Most 12-year-olds spent summers playing video games. I spent mine learning how to maintain a mountain property. At the time, I thought she simply enjoyed having company. Now I know she was teaching me something much bigger. One evening, we sat on the porch watching the sunset spill gold across the valley below. The mountains looked endless. Grandma handed me a mug of hot chocolate. "Eliana," she said quietly. "Yeah? What makes something valuable?" I shrugged. "Money?" She laughed. "That's what most people think." Then she pointed toward the valley. "That view is worth millions to some developer." I nodded. "The question isn't what it's worth. The question is what it means." I didn't understand. Not then. I would years later. Back home in Ashton Falls, conversations were different. My father, Richard Brooks, owned a hardware supply business that had struggled for years. Every family dinner seemed to revolve around money. Bills, loans, business problems, investments. Always money. My uncle Victor was even worse. He worked in commercial real estate and could turn any conversation into a discussion about property values. One evening, the lodge came up during dinner. Victor was visiting. My grandmother wasn't there, which meant everyone felt comfortable speaking freely. "That mountain property has become incredibly valuable," Victor said while scrolling through something on his tablet. Dad nodded immediately. "I know." Victor turned the screen toward him. I looked up comparable sales. Dad's eyes widened. "No kidding. No kidding." "What?" I asked. Victor smiled. "The land alone could sell for close to $700,000. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. "Sell?" "Eventually," Dad said casually. "It should stay in the family." Both men laughed, not cruelly, not loudly, just enough to tell me they thought I was being naive. "That's not how investments work, kiddo," Dad said. I looked down at my plate. Across the table, my younger brother Mason was talking excitedly about a baseball tournament. Mom was listening. Nobody cared what I thought. The conversation moved on, but something about that moment stayed with me. Because for the first time, I realized they weren't talking about the lodge the way Grandma did. To her, it was home. To them, it was an asset, a number, a future paycheck. That night, while helping clear the dishes, I accidentally noticed a folder sitting on the kitchen counter. A developer's brochure, Luxury Mountain Communities. The front cover showed giant houses built into hillsides, golf courses, private roads, resort amenities. A handwritten note sat on top. Call after appraisal. I stared at it, then quietly put it back exactly where I found it. Something felt wrong. I just couldn't explain why. 2 years later, my grandfather passed away. The funeral was held on a gray Thursday morning. Rain threatened all day. Everyone wore black. Everyone looked sad. Almost everyone. While guests gathered after the service, I noticed my father and Uncle Victor standing near the refreshments table. Neither had touched their food. Instead, they were speaking in low voices. Victor held a folder. Dad kept nodding. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but I happened to walk past just as Victor said something that made my stomach tighten. "We should move quickly before anything gets complicated." Dad glanced around. "Do you think Mom knows?" Victor smirked. "Not for much longer." I kept walking, but the words stayed with me. At 14, I didn't understand estate law. I didn't understand property transfers. I didn't understand trusts. What I did understand was instinct. And my instincts were screaming that something wasn't right. Over the next 2 years, Grandma's health slowly declined. She never complained, never wanted sympathy. Even when treatments exhausted her, she still insisted on spending weekends at Pine Ridge Lodge. One rainy afternoon, when I was 16, we sat inside listening to water strike the roof. She looked smaller than she used to, frail, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. "Promise me something," she said suddenly. "Anything. If anyone ever pressures you about this place, don't make decisions because you're scared." I frowned. Who's going to pressure me? For the first time in my life, she looked genuinely sad. People change when they think money is involved. A chill ran through me. "Are you talking about Dad?" Grandma didn't answer, which was answer enough. 3 months later, she was gone. And the moment the funeral ended, my father and Uncle Victor started talking about the property again. Not memories, not grief, not family, property. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. I remember lying awake that night staring at my ceiling. Something was coming. I didn't know what. I didn't know when. But I knew one thing. My grandmother had been trying to warn me. And somewhere deep down, I had a feeling that Pine Ridge Lodge was about to become the center of a battle none of us were ready for. After Grandma Eleanor passed away, Pine Ridge Lodge became my escape. While everyone else seemed focused on moving on, I spent nearly every weekend there. I repaired loose boards, cleaned gutters, trimmed overgrown brush. The lodge felt alive when someone cared for it. At home, things were changing. Dad and Uncle Victor talked about the property more often than ever. They stopped calling it Grandma's Lodge. Now it was the family asset. "The land is worth a fortune," Victor said one night. Dad nodded. "We'll figure everything out once Eliana turns 18. The way he said it made my stomach knot, as if my birthday wasn't a celebration. It was a deadline. 3 months before I turned 18, something unexpected happened. I was cleaning a storage cabinet at the lodge when I found an envelope hidden behind a stack of blankets. My name was written across the front. Inside was a business card. Laura Bennett, attorney at law, Bennett Estate Services. Nothing else. No explanation. No note. Just the card. I slipped it into my wallet. For weeks I debated calling, then I didn't have to. One evening my phone rang. Unknown number. "Eliana Brooks?" a woman asked. "Yes." "My name is Laura Bennett. I represented your grandmother. We need to meet before your 18th birthday." My heart started racing. The following Saturday, I sat across from her in a small office downtown. She opened a thick folder. What she told me changed everything. 6 years earlier, my grandparents had created an irrevocable trust. The lodge wasn't part of their estate. Neither were several investment accounts or savings funds. Everything had been transferred long before either of them died. And I was the sole beneficiary. I stared at her. "I don't understand." "Your grandmother understood your family very well," Laura said carefully. "She wanted to ensure her wishes couldn't be overturned." She slid documents across the desk. The trust was worth nearly $3 million. The lodge, investments, savings, everything, legally protected, untouchable. My father had no claim. Neither did Uncle Victor. I sat there speechless. Then Laura said something even more surprising. "Someone has recently been asking questions about the property's ownership records." My stomach dropped. "Who?" "I can't prove it, but I think your uncle." Suddenly, every conversation made sense. Every comment about selling, every discussion about land values, every strange deadline connected to my 18th birthday. They weren't planning. They were preparing. That Sunday evening, I got proof. Dad and Uncle Victor were talking in the garage. The door was partially open. I wasn't trying to listen, but I heard enough. "The buyer is ready," Victor said. "We just need the paperwork." Dad sounded nervous. "What if Eliana objects?" Victor laughed. "She's a teenager. Offer her some money for college and she'll sign." "How much? 50,000 should do it." My hands tightened into fists. They were discussing my grandmother's legacy like it was already theirs. Like my opinion didn't matter. Like I didn't exist. Then Victor said something that chilled me. "The developer wants an answer before her birthday." I quietly stepped away before they saw me. That night, I called Laura. "They're trying to move faster." Her answer came immediately. "I expected they would." "So what do I do?" There was a brief pause. Nothing. What? You stay calm. You tell nobody what you know. And the moment you turn 18, we act first. For the next several weeks, I smiled through every family dinner. I listened. I watched. And I kept my secret. Because while my father and uncle thought they were counting down to a payday, I was counting down to the day their entire plan collapsed. The week before my 18th birthday felt like a countdown. Dad suddenly became unusually friendly. Uncle Victor stopped by almost every day. Even Mom started talking about family responsibility. One evening, Dad sat beside me on the couch. "Once you're 18, we'll need your signature on a few things," he said casually. "What things?" "Just paperwork involving the lodge. Nothing complicated." I smiled. "I'll think about it." His expression tightened for a moment before returning to normal. That same night, my younger brother Mason knocked on my bedroom door. "Are Mom and Dad okay?" he asked. "What do you mean?" "They keep talking about money after they think everyone's asleep." I didn't know what to say, because I already knew exactly what they were talking about. 3 days before my birthday, Uncle Victor cornered me in the driveway. "The developer is offering a great deal," he said. "You'll get $50,000 for college." "And if I don't sign?" His smile faded. "Don't make things difficult, Ileana." For the first time, I saw the pressure behind the charm, the desperation, the greed. That night, I drove to Pine Ridge Lodge alone. I sat on the porch where Grandma and I used to watch sunsets. The mountains were silent. The air smelled of pine and rain. I pulled out my phone and reread Laura Bennett's email. Everything was ready. All I had to do was wait. Just before midnight, I returned home and locked myself in my room. At 11:58 p.m., I joined a video call with Laura. A stack of legal documents sat on my desk. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded. The clock changed. 12 a.m., I was officially 18. Laura guided me through the paperwork. One signature, then another, then the final page. When I finished, she smiled. "It's done." "What happens now?" "Tomorrow morning, I file the trust protections with the county. After that, nobody can touch the property." I stared at my signature. For years, my father and uncle had been planning their sale. For years, my grandmother had been planning to stop them. And at midnight, her plan finally became active. Downstairs, my family slept peacefully. They believed tomorrow would be the beginning of their victory. They had no idea it was actually the end of their scheme. The next morning, Laura Bennett arrived at the county records office the moment it opened. Within minutes, the trust documents were officially recorded. The lodge was protected. No sale, no transfer, no loopholes, nothing. Meanwhile, my father and Uncle Victor had no idea. That afternoon, our house filled with guests for my birthday party. Neighbors, family friends, people who had known me since I was a child. Dad stood near the cake table, smiling like a man who had already won. Uncle Victor kept checking his phone every few minutes, waiting for news. At one point, Dad raised his glass. "I'd like to make a toast." The room quieted. He smiled proudly. "As many of you know, our family has some exciting plans ahead. We've decided to sell the mountain lodge and use the proceeds to secure our future." Several guests nodded. Then Dad looked directly at me. "Eliana understands this is the right decision." Every eye in the room turned toward me. The silence stretched. I slowly set down my drink. "No," I said. The room froze. Dad blinked. "What?" "I never agreed to sell the lodge." His smile disappeared. Victor stepped forward. "Eliana, this isn't the place for this conversation." I looked at him calmly. "Actually, Uncle Victor, the conversation already happened." A second later, his phone buzzed, then buzzed again, and again. His face turned pale as he read the screen. "What is it?" Dad asked. Victor didn't answer. He was staring at the message. Finally, he whispered, "The county rejected the filing." Dad frowned. "What filing?" Victor looked like someone had punched him. "The title isn't in your mother's name." "What are you talking about?" "It's in a trust." The room became completely silent. Dad's face drained of color. "A trust?" he repeated. I reached into my purse and placed a folded document on the table. "The lodge belongs to the Brooks Family Trust." Dad stared at me. "You knew?" "Yes." "You planned this?" "No." I looked around the room. My grandmother did. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Dad's voice rose. "You went behind our backs." "No," I said quietly. "You tried to sell something that was never yours." The words hit harder than I expected. Victor sank into a chair. His hands were shaking. because the message on his phone contained even worse news. The developer had discovered he didn't own the property. The contract he signed was worthless. And according to the agreement, he could be personally liable for tens of thousands of dollars. The party ended shortly afterward. Guests left quickly. Nobody wanted to stay for the explosion that was coming. As the front door closed behind the last visitor, Dad turned toward me, angrier than I had ever seen him. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid, because the one thing he wanted most was already out of reach. And there was nothing he could do about it. The days after my birthday were ugly. Dad barely spoke to me, Mom cried almost every night, and Uncle Victor's problems got worse by the hour. The developer he had signed with wasn't interested in excuses. They wanted answers. When they discovered he had promised property he didn't own, they immediately canceled the deal and demanded compensation under the contract. Within weeks, lawyers were involved. Then came another problem. The county investigation revealed irregularities in the paperwork Victor had attempted to file. His real estate license was suspended while the matter was reviewed. For the first time in his life, Uncle Victor couldn't talk his way out of trouble. As for Dad, he eventually learned something painful. The lodge had never been his safety net. My grandparents had made that decision years before. The money he thought would solve his financial problems was never his to spend. One afternoon, he sat across from me at our kitchen table, looking older than I had ever seen him. "I really thought your grandmother would leave it to me," he admitted. "Why?" "Because I was her son." I looked at him quietly. Being someone's child doesn't automatically mean you honor what they love. He lowered his eyes, and for once, he didn't argue. A month later, I moved into Pine Ridge Lodge. The first night alone felt strange, not lonely, peaceful, like I was finally where I belonged. While organizing drawers in Grandma's old desk, I found an envelope Laura had told me about. My name was written across the front. Inside was a handwritten letter. I recognized Grandma's handwriting immediately. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. The letter wasn't long. She wrote that she loved her family, even the ones who disappointed her. But she also wrote that love and trust were not always the same thing. Then came the sentence that brought tears to my eyes. "I chose you because you cared for this place before you knew it was worth anything." I read that line 3 times, then 4, because it wasn't really about the lodge. It never had been. It was about character, about values, about understanding that some things matter more than money. At the bottom of the letter was one final message. Protect what deserves protecting, not because it's valuable, but because it's important. I sat on the porch until sunset with that letter in my lap. The mountains glowed gold. The wind moved softly through the pines. For the first time in years, the future felt clear. Eventually, Dad and I began talking again. Slowly, carefully. The relationship wasn't magically repaired. Some wounds take time. But he stopped asking about the lodge, and I stopped waiting for an apology that might never come. As for Uncle Victor, he moved away the following year. I heard he was trying to rebuild his career in another city. I wished him well. Holding on to anger would only make me carry the burden he created. The greatest lesson my grandmother left me wasn't about property or money. It was about standing firm when people try to make you surrender what matters. Years later, whenever I sit on the porch at Pine Ridge Lodge and watch the sun disappear behind the mountains, I think about her. I think about the promise I made. And I think about the day she protected me one last time, not with advice, not with words, but with a plan she created years before she was gone. A plan built on love, patience, and foresight. The lodge is still standing today. The porch still creaks, the pines still sway in the wind. And every time I unlock the front door, I remember something my grandmother once told me. Money comes and goes, character stays. In the end, that was the real inheritance she left behind. And unlike the lodge, no one could ever take that away.